How's it going, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the All-Time Gaming Series. I'm Steve Cravens.
I'm Andres Gallego.
And today we're talking about Remedy's Max Payne, which was released in 2001 on the Xbox, PlayStation, and for PC. And it follows NYPD officer Max Payne, who decides to go undercover and try to uncover the conspiracy that resulted in the murder of his wife and baby girl. This is a game that has, it's almost 20 years old, and yet it still holds up. For the most part, it still holds up, both in terms of gameplay and in terms of the story of what Max goes through. I mean, his arc throughout the game. We're going to get into all the different aspects of the game, but let me ask you first, can you tell me about your first experience playing Max Payne? Do you remember it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The first time I ever played Max Payne, I went over to my cousin's place, and he was playing this game on his PS2 at the time, and we were all still high off of freaking Grand Theft Auto 3 and some of these really big trailblazers that all came out in the same year. And it was Christmas, and for some reason we were playing this hard-boiled detective game, and it was just unlike anything I had ever seen. And then also coming off of The Matrix and just the lack of games that actually replicated that experience, it was just a breath of fresh air. And then I finally got to play it, and it blew my mind in terms of the story and in terms of how the cutscenes were even done. I mean, me as a big comic book fan, that was sort of a breath of fresh air where I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic.
I mean, when we talk about certain video games, I mean, for example, our Metal Gear Solid video, we talked about how groundbreaking it was, how, the trailblazer that it is. This game it's equally impressive for just how revolutionary it was at the time. Obviously, we're going to talk about the gameplay, but for its story, like you said, a hard-boiled detective noir story that's also, obviously heavily action-based and influenced by, the Hong Kong cinema of John Woo. But we had never seen a detective story like this before on any platform. Certainly not one that blended its, influence from movies and, the graphic novel presentation that it had, for its cutscenes. A really, really fresh new game at the time. I mean, I still remember playing it. I was in 6th grade. I got the PlayStation 2 version, and I was 12 years old at the time. And I remember playing it and thinking, I think I might be too young to play this.
Yeah.
because it's a very seedy, very kind of I don't want to say low class, but it was very kind of dirty. It made you feel filthy playing that game. Its world was so real, and the characters were so real, and the situations and events that Max found himself in. Look no further than the intro of the game where his wife and baby girl are murdered.
Oh my God. No, that scene practically almost traumatized me when I was younger playing that game for the first time.
It was what the hell? I mean, you see that at 12, and it's so horrific. I mean, the noises that you hear, the screaming, the blood, I mean, and the horrible, dark, foreboding atmosphere in the house. I mean, playing that at 12 years old, I was just like, Jesus, I should not be playing this right now. This is terrible. But, again... Also, there was kind of no, you know what? I've started this thing. I'm going all the way with this thing. I'm going to go. I don't care how disturbing it gets. I don't care how violent it gets. I'm going to finish this thing, and I did.
But what was brilliant about that opening was the fact that you open up with such a hardcore level of violence and such a traumatic experience that you legitimately feel that you can empathize with Max, where he's like, you know what? Going down that dark alleyway full of freaking drug dealers and the worst that New York has to offer? No, I've seen worse. And you're like, yep, I've seen worse. It gave you a certain level of confidence, and it also gave you a certain level of empathy with Max, where it's just you really did feel for the first time that this was a cop with nothing to lose.
Absolutely. I mean, just a brilliant game, a trailblazer in every sense. I mean, in terms of its story, in terms of its voice acting, in terms of its presentation with the graphic novel panels, which were still awesome. I mean, it just really sets them with the music.
Yeah.
It all came together to form a masterpiece. So why don't we start with this in terms of the aspects of the game that I really want to talk about. Let's talk about the gameplay.
Hmm.
This game is famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, for its bullet time. We've never seen anything like it before. Can you talk to me, in your opinion, does the bullet time still hold up? And can you talk about like the first time you actually did the bullet time? What was going through your mind?
Okay, well, the bullet time for me absolutely still holds up. I don't think any other game has done it better than Max Payne. In terms of what this game brought to the table, I mean, it not only brought you just that sense of just what it felt like to be in the Matrix, but it also brought you that sense of just the gameplay that you've always wanted to see from a game like this.
But it made it cinematic too. Like you said, it was a playable movie. It kind of, if Metal Gear Solid had the torch of making a cinematic game a reality, then Max Payne took the torch and ran with it, because it brought in a bunch of different flavors. It brought in like the detective noir. It brought in Hong Kong action cinema from John Woo, The Matrix, like you said. I mean, like, and you could feel it in the gameplay. I mean, specifically in the bullet time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with the what do you call it, the hourglass. You could only use it for a certain amount of time. You couldn't use it forever, obviously. But I mean, for the little amount of time you had, depending on how many guys you were shooting up, you had to use it well. It would take a while to fill back up, so you couldn't just use it at your leisure, depending on the difficulty you played the game on. Obviously, throughout the series for 2 and 3, I mean, the bullet time just got better and better. But for that first one, I mean, that was just such a unique, and it's not even really a gimmick. It factored into the gameplay. It factored into the way you played the game. It wasn't just something that you switched on, switched off, and it was like, oh, that was cool for a little while, but I'm not really going to use it anymore. No, that factored into your playing the game. All your decisions that you made.
I think it's still a great gimmick, but the thing is that it felt so satisfying to play through that gimmick over and over again. I mean, we all talk about gimmicks, but like this one, I never got bored of bullet time, and especially with the moments where you're aiming with the sniper rifle. Every time you come into that last shot with somebody, it zooms in right behind the bullet, and you follow the bullet's perspective in going into a guy's head. I mean, hell, that's still the stage is so satisfying and so gratifying.
It is, yeah. I mean, even rewatching it on YouTube and seeing somebody else play it. I mean, like, I still remember playing it, and just that satisfying feeling of when the final bullet went through the last opponent that you had to take care of. Oh man, it was just, I mean, that game was just so much fun. And the bullet time, yes. I mean, you can say it was a gimmick, but I mean, it was so revolutionary for the time.
Mm-hmm.
It even beat The Matrix out of, because remember, Enter the Matrix came out in 2003, and yet I know. but the point is, we got the bullet time in that. It wasn't nearly the same thing. It's like, how does a game that has no affiliation with The Matrix whatsoever end up doing the bullet time better than an actual Matrix game written by the Wachowskis? And the Wachowskis were heavily involved in it. How did whatever? We're going to get into a tangent on Enter the Matrix. But what about you? What do you have? What do you have to ask?
Well, one of the things I wanted to talk about with this game was, in terms of the script, it combines several different elements from noir stories, from the John Woo type of action films, but it also combines something oddly unique to this gaming series in particular, which was all the Norse mythology as well. Mm-hmm. My question to you is, how do you feel that all blended together to create this experience? And if anything, what is a standout moment from you from the entire script of the game?
I think it worked really well. I think the game, like you said, it's a big cocktail of various influences, and the game wears it on its sleeve. I mean, it doesn't try to hide its influences. It should, like you said, it shouldn't have worked with all of this like wildly different content kind of coming together and creating this, Frankenstein's monster of a game. But it does work. It's so fluid, and the game the influence it does have and the influence it does show, it embraced it, and it just stuck with that instead of trying to put way too many things into the cocktail, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, yes, the
Yeah.
Norse mythology, the movie influences, the graphic novel influences the fiction noir from, you know, the different detective authors of the 40s and 50s. It all works seamlessly.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that I also think held that together as well too is the noir writing. I mean, still this day, I mean, I played so many noir type of games since Max Payne, and I don't think anyone has even come close to matching the gritty nature of the noir style that Max does in the voiceovers. I mean, there's so many things where you're just like, oh, they're just trying to act like they're noir, but Max Payne was the only one that I felt nailed it top to bottom and was its own voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, it takes its influences, but it creates its own thing, and it's certainly with the writing. I mean, it is brilliant. I mean,
Yeah.
you feel like a veteran, you know, grizzled noir author wrote this stuff, and I mean, it almost to the point where really every single panel, every single graphic novel panel or voiceover narration, you can quote it. It's quotable. It sticks out in your mind. There's so many memorable lines of dialogue in the game. Um, I mean, I'm not going to get into specific speeds. You know, we could be here talking about it for like 20 minutes if that was the case. But it's such a rare thing for a game to have its own unique voice in terms of the writing, in terms of what the characters are saying, and to have a consistent presentation throughout. You know, sometimes, you know, games, you know, they'll have great dialogue here and there, but it won't, you know, carry through the entire game. It does with Max Payne, and it's brilliantly atmospheric, and it fits the tone of the game perfectly.
A lot of games live or die off of their locales as well. New York City is an entire character in this game.
Yes.
I remember specifically when I played the game for the first time. I've played so many games where they claim to be New York, like, you know, True Crime in Streets of New York and all this other stuff. Max Payne was the only one that I legitimately felt like you could walk out the door and that was what you would see. Like, it felt legitly New York to me.
Now, you mentioned Grand Theft Auto 3 earlier. That is very obviously supposed to be New York City, even though it's called Liberty City. That same year, 2001, Metal Gear Solid 2 comes out. The ending takes place in Manhattan. At least a small glimpse of it. Like you said, no game was able to recreate the atmosphere, the tangible atmosphere of New York City like Max Payne did. You know, you got the feeling that you were in Manhattan, that you were in the Bronx, that you were in Brooklyn, that you were in, you know, the subways of, you know, New York City during this really crazy blizzard. And I think again, as much as we're talking about the writing, you know, really creating that atmosphere, the location of New York City was created so flawlessly. I mean, obviously we look at it now and you can see it is a little bit dated, but at the time,
yeah,
it was so immersive and really put the player into New York City. And again, I mean, it's a masterpiece for many different reasons, but it just, you know, it's kind of lightning in a bottle in the sense that it really, every single aspect of the game came out brilliantly. I mean, it's just, yes, New York City is a very tangible atmosphere. It's a very real location. This game, and you know, we're talking about movie influences, similar to the way Los Angeles is a central character in Michael Mann's Heat, or in Collateral, which came out 9 years later. I mean, you know, that goes back to the movie influences, how the location of a movie, the location of a game becomes that character. And in many ways, the city of New York is just as big of a character, even bigger than Max is in his own game.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It kind of felt like New York City was this, for lack of a better word, this Tower of Babylon where all these different things were all coming together. But instead of like it being all about cultures, it was all about the different crime syndicates. Like, you know, you have Jack Lupino's thing, you have Vincent Gagnetti's thing as well too. I can't believe I still remember some of these names after all these years.
Vinny Gagnetti, Jack Lupino. Frank the Bat Niagara, you know, like,
oh my God.
Rico Muerte, you know, like all these different, like, you know, names that are like, you know, over the top, but, you know, they fit the pulpy, you know, detective noir vibe that they were going for.
Absolutely.
So, we talked about the location. I mean, we talked about the graphic novel influences. Um, what did you make of the voice acting in the game?
Oh, James McCaffrey carries this entire thing. And with James McCaffrey not on board, I don't think we've been looking at the story of this game the same way. The gameplay we might have looked fondly of, but this game lived or died on James McCaffrey's performance. And he was freaking fantastic.
When you think Max Payne, you're thinking about James McCaffrey's voice.
Yeah.
It is iconic.
Oh, God, yeah.
It is. His voice almost sounds like he liked to gargle with salt water in the morning, like he'd smoke 3 packs of cigarettes before he not 3 packs of cigarettes, but he smoked 3 cigarettes before he even had breakfast in the morning. You know what I mean? Like just that very gravelly, very raspy voice. Like that. This guy has been through hell and back, and he doesn't care who knows it. He's not trying to hide it.
Mm-hmm.
Just really amazing stuff by James McCaffrey. And like you said, we probably still really appreciate the game and love it for its gameplay, for the bullet time, for the graphic novel panels, the great writing, amazing New York location. But without James McCaffrey's voice as the main character, as Max Payne, I don't think we would remember it the same way we do now. I mean, he is the heart and soul of that game. His voice is worth every penny. For whatever they paid James McCaffrey to do the voice of Max, it was worth every penny.
Oh, absolutely. And you look back on that entire series, the one constant has always been James McCaffrey's voice. But the other thing that constantly changed too was the interpretation and the look of Max Payne. Because in the first one we got Sam Lake as Max Payne, which that's actually the director of the game.
Right.
And he stepped in to basically do all the photo shoots and all that other stuff. And then when he got a bigger budget in the sequels, they decided to basically just go for a real actor and stuff like that. And they're like, for a little bit getting used to Sam Lake and James McCaffrey's voice together, it was kind of a little strange at first, but then you tuned into it, and now I can't unsee it, and I can't think of James McCaffrey's voice without freaking Sam Lake. Probably my other question to you would be, what do you think of Sam Lake's look for Max himself?
Yeah, I think, when it comes to video game characters, how they're dressed is always very important because, obviously that creates our mental image of them, and, you can change it as the game goes on. Certainly in Grand Theft Auto games, you can change your character's appearance at will. But for, the time when you only had one set, and not one set piece, he does come in with the suit at the beginning, but when you stick with one look for the character throughout the majority of the game, it's very important. And I think it fits, I love he has got the leather jacket, the jeans, and, keep in mind, there's a major blizzard going on at the time when the game takes place. But, it's not over the top. It's appropriate for the setting. It's appropriate for the weather that the character is in. And it's very stylish, and it's timeless. This isn't like an attire or a look for a character that we look back on it 20 years later. We're like, man, that didn't really age well, did it?
Yeah.
The look of them aged, pretty well. Same thing with all the other characters in the game, actually, how they're dressed. Some of them more over the top than others. They might have cheetah shirts on. They might have, suspenders and, kind of look like, douchebags. But no, the actual design of Max, including using Sam Lake's face as the model for the character, even though it is a little jarring when you look at Max Payne 2 and Max Payne 3 when they went away from Sam Lake's face for the character, it works. And yes, it is a little silly when you hit the pause button and you see everything in slow motion. It kind of does like the 360 camera view, and Sam Lake's face will be contorted, and with the like he'll always look a very squinty face. But you know what I mean? I still think that it could have turned out a lot worse. Mm-hmm. And I think the look of Max, it still holds up, and it still provides some laughs. Even at the time playing it in 2001, when you would hit the pause when you see him, boom. It's funny, but I mean, again, it was good. I liked it. What about you?
Oddly enough for me, it worked as well too. I mean, like, it also worked in a way to ground you that this was also a game as well too, because again, there's a balance of tone that needs to be set with any game in particular, and this one is probably one of the darkest that I've ever played. Like, hands down, still this day, probably one of the darkest games I've ever played. And the fine line that Remedy went down with this in terms of balancing the darkness aspects with some of the more funnier, more outlandish bits, like freaking Max. At one point, Max gets captured by a guy who's obsessed with cartoon violence, and then also on top of that, there's another moment where he walks into a building full of gangsters, and the password in order to get inside the building is what? John Woo.
Yeah. I for as dark as the game gets, the pulpy nature of it also kind of brings you back to earth and realize that yes, it is just a game. I actually want to bring this up because we did talk about New York City as a location and how great the location was, with the blizzard and everything like that. I want to talk about more specifically the locations you go to throughout the game and how it's almost kind of like a Dante's Inferno where you're descending into the bowels of hell. Amazingly enough, for a game, because Max Payne apparently did have a limited budget, especially for the time.
Yeah.
You are in New York City, yes, but they kept the locations within New York City very diverse. You start off with, the subway. You go onto the streets of New York City. You go into Ragnarok, the nightclub owned by Jack Lupino, the satanic, literally hell on earth nightclub that you go into. Alfred Woden's mansion, the Acer Plaza skyscraper. It really had a bunch of different locations within the city that kept it fresh. You were never in the same location for very long. Is there any location out of all the locations I made mention, maybe even one that I didn't mention, that stands out to you the most?
For this game in particular, I think probably the one that still stands out to me the most is Jack Lupino's nightclub, Ragnarok. Absolutely. I mean, the level of unsettledness that I experienced in terms of walking through that entire level in particular and hearing Jack Lupino just chanting all the satanic stuff, it's one of those that has stuck with me still to this day. But apart from that as well, would have to just be when you're chasing a Vinny Gognitti and you're going through all these small little slums and all these like really seedy apartments in New York City. Just the amount of diversity between jumping from one building to the other and then just seeing just how broken down some of these places were and just how much of a shithole that they were. I mean, it was one of those games that legitimately was not afraid to make New York City look bad at points.
To show the slummier side of New York City. I'm with you. I mean, the Jack Lupino Ragnarok nightclub is, at the time, we talked about the intro where his wife and daughter are killed. Mm-hmm. We talk about that being disturbing. Jack Lupino's voice booming over the speakers, preaching all this evil, satanic shit as you're going deeper and deeper into the nightclub to kill him. Incredibly unsettling. Seeing the pentagrams on the wall and, the place decked out in this, incredibly ambient and dark candlelight.
Yeah.
The music in the background, that really, that felt like something you would see in a movie. A very cinematic game, but that itself was like, man, I really feel like this character is getting in over his head, like he is really about to face true evil.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And coming from somebody who watched The Exorcist in a basement by himself and just kind of felt nothing, that scene in particular scared the shit out of me when I was a kid.
It was disturbing. For as much as this game is a pure action game, it also has horror elements to it too.
It legitimately made you feel like a cop. With certain things, there's not going to necessarily be one thing that you're going to come across as a cop. He comes across gangsters, he comes across satanic cultists, he comes across just this weird, oddly diverse, but vaguely believable group of people in the seedy crime underbelly of New York City. This was going to be a night of hell for Max Payne, and you legitimately felt like all the way through he was just going from one place to another, and it was just getting progressively harder and progressively weirder as it went along.
Especially with the nightmare sequences.
Oh God, we didn't even talk about that.
No, so let's talk about it. So we talk about how, the game gets progressively worse for our character. A big component of the game is the designer drug Valkyr V, which the junkies were on, where they killed his wife and daughter. And then Max himself ingests the drug. It's slipped into him, from various forms, whether it's an injection or whether it's in a drink. And the nightmare sequences keep getting worse and worse and worse. And they stand out. The whole pitch black abyss that you're in with the trail of blood that you're walking on, and God forbid you fall off that trail of blood, because then you're going to hear a scream that you've never heard before and you never want to hear again. Like you want to beat those nightmare sequences as quickly as possible so you don't have to hear that shit anymore. Can you talk about your first time playing that, and what was your reaction?
Oh, Jesus Christ. First time I played that was with my cousin as well too, in the same room, and like there was definitely a hush that came across both of us when we were playing that, because it legitimately felt like just again, it felt like that moment where you're just like, I don't know if I should be playing this or not. Like, I was truly disturbed. And what they did so brilliantly was the fact that, because of the fact that Max can't get over the death of his wife and his daughter, his baby daughter, he just, that is like a coal miner in his mind, constantly tapping on him and constantly just in there, and he just can't get that out, and he just can't move forward from that. And what those nightmare sequences did was to perfectly illustrate just the tortured nature of him, and just to truly understand what this pain that he was going through and what his worst day was. I mean, the designer drug V, it was supposed to bring out just, as I recall in the game, it's supposed to bring out your most violent moments out in you. But the thing was that what Max wanted to bring out more than anything wasn't necessarily violence. It was the sadness that he was feeling inside of himself. And it was just, it was just so unlike any other game that had a nightmare sequence where it's just like, oh, well, it blurs out a little bit and then it turns into, just a dreamlike sequence where you can tell it's a dream. Whereas with these nightmare sequences, I couldn't wait to be done with them. As much as they worked in a gameplay sense, I couldn't wait to get out of those sequences because of how uncomfortable it made me feel. And a lot of people would probably go, well, does that really amount to a good aspect of the gameplay? Absolutely, it does, because it puts you in that mindset, and it puts you inside of Max's pain, and it puts you inside of Max's his feeling towards everything that's going on all around him. It was brilliant. It worked so incredibly well. I mean, but what about you? What was your experience playing that freaking nightmare?
It was actually at nighttime. I remember playing it was at nighttime, because I mean, this was, in the time of my life where, like, it was like video games, movies, and when a new video game like this came out, it's like that obsessive urge to beat it was, pretty strong. So from morning till night, I was playing it. Mm-hmm. Playing it for the first time, I remember thinking, I was like, I've played Resident Evil games. I don't remember ever being as creeped out or unnerved by a sequence in a game like that before. Because, like you said, you got a glimpse into the man's soul, and you got a glimpse into how much pain he was going through and how much that haunted him. And, the dark places that his soul was going to. I mean, it's just, it was more disturbing than anything I had played previously. And like I said, they got progressively worse. And like you said, I mean, you wanted to get done with them as soon as possible. I mean, obviously you want to progress with the game and get, keep the story moving forward, but there were certain parts of the game that you wouldn't mind playing again, certain shootouts that you wouldn't mind doing again that were a lot of fun. This was not fun. It was stressful and it was terrifying. So I remember playing it, and just being like kind of creeped out of my skull and just being like, God, this game's creepier than any horror game I've ever played.
Yeah, and this is an action game too.
And it's an action game. This is not, this isn't Resident Evil. This isn't, Silent Hill. It's an action. It's a John Woo action game, and yet it's creeping the shit out of me. So yeah, that's what I remember, and I remember being relieved when the first nightmare was over, because I thought that was going to be it. Mm-hmm. There's no way they're going to make us do this again. Certainly, they're not going to get away with making it worse. Remedy said, "Hold my beer."
They said, hold my beer, and not only that, we're going to make you experience that intro over and over and over again.
And over and over again. I mean, just, God. But yeah, no, that's all I got on my end of it. I mean, again, incredible gameplay, incredible shootouts, incredible world of New York City, incredible, sub-levels, if you will, incredible writing, real breathtaking writing, really, like timeless writing.
Yeah.
What about you? What when you think of Max Payne, what are your final thoughts on Max Payne?
My final thoughts on Max Payne is it's definitely one of those action games that I can just sit down and play over and over again. It's available on the PS4, and it's still to stay with the graphics cleaned up a little bit. Still to stay holds up, and I can play easily a couple hours into it, and it doesn't get boring or tired at all for me. Whenever I think of Max Payne, the first thing that pops up is James McCaffrey every time. That voiceover and that music is indelible in my mind.
Absolutely, 100%. I'm with James McCaffrey, the music, the writing. There's so many great aspects of this game. And honestly, if anybody's watching this that hasn't played the game and you have a PS4, I highly recommend it. Andres, I know you recommend it. I mean, it's just, it's still nearly 20 years later, it still holds up, and then some.
Oh, yeah.
Some aspects of it, maybe not so much, but on the whole, yes, it does. Absolutely, 100%. It's one of the greatest action games ever made, and, I kind of just want to play it right now. I have it on my PlayStation 4. I kind of want to do that right now, but...
Yeah, dude. I absolutely love this game, so anybody that hasn't played it, I would recommend they try it out immediately.
But for now, that's going to do it for us here on the All-Time Gaming Show. I'm Steve Cravens.
I'm Andres Gallego.
And our Twitter handle is right there at the bottom. And please like and subscribe, and we'll be doing one of these at the very least, every 2 weeks at the very least?
At the very least, yeah. We have a lot of games to talk about.
We got plenty of games to talk about, an endless library. So thank you for watching this episode of Max Payne, and we'll catch you next time.
Later.
They were all dead. The final gunshot was an exclamation mark to everything that had led to this point. I released my finger from the trigger, and then it was over.